Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the December 11th, 2018 City Council meeting. And we'll start out by doing a roll call.
Bartlett.
Here.
Hirsch.
Here.
Riley.
Here.
Boersma.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Reeves.
Here.
Majewski.
Here.
Caravello.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
O'Connor.
Here.
Durantic.
Here.
And Weisinger is absent and excused.
Thank you. And the next order of business would be communications. Are there any communications? Alderperson, who's down there? Johnson?
Yeah. I just wanted to let the people that are listening know that there is an ordinance where you cannot park your vehicle on the street over 48 hours. And it's been on our books for a number of years, and you may not get a warning, you'll maybe get a ticket, but just to get that out there, I got a call from a citizen that said they had no knowledge of this, so I'm trying to get it out there so many people as possible will know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other communications? Our clerk has communications.
So for those alders that are up for election in 2019, the first day to circulate, and for anyone who is wanting to run for office in 2019, the first day to circulate nomination papers was December 1st. The deadline to submit those to the clerk's office is 5 p.m. on January 2nd. And then if you are an alder that does not plan on running for another term, your non-candidacy paperwork is due December 21st. And I have already received 2 notifications of non-candidacy for Alders O'Connor and Durantic.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other communications? I have one. I'd like to recognize 3 members of Stoughton Utilities, and that would be Scott Gonzalez, Kent Thompson, and Marty Seffens. On December 2nd, there was a water main leak over by Keegan's school. It was a Sunday night, I believe.
Yeah.
And they were out there till about midnight patching it up. Otherwise, school would have been canceled on that next day. So I just want to recognize them for all the work they did and all the inconvenience they were able to avoid by working extra to get that taken care of. So thanks to those guys. I don't know if the students would agree, but I think the parents were really happy. Most of them didn't even realize it was going on, so thanks to them. We have one other announcement on here that you probably saw or heard. We're not planning on having a second council meeting in December unless something comes up. If anybody has something that they just can't wait to do this month, let us know and we'll take it into consideration. Other than that, presentations. We do have a presentation from our Public Works. Brett Aber is going to do a snow removal presentation tonight, and we'll see if this thing's ready to roll.
We're ready to rock. So as I go through the presentation, please ask any questions as I go along. This is a basic overview of our operation, just so that the council is informed and the general public is informed as well. So basically, we take care of or maintain 120 lane miles of roadway. That amounts to 7 residential plow routes. We do have a downtown plow route, 2 cul-de-sac routes, which is new this year, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. We have about 56 different walking paths throughout the city that are owned by the city, and about 10 different parking lots. So what we do is we break our roads down into our mains, secondaries, and our tertiaries. So our main routes are typically our collector streets, and what we do is during the storm, so as the snow is falling or as we're getting sleet, we keep these mains open or clear for emergency services. We typically have a skeleton crew come in, about 2 to 4 different operators. Then we lightly salt the mains and intersections, inclines. We pay special attention to the schools and the hospital, and of course the churches on Sunday mornings.
So is King Street one of the main streets?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I just, have bumped into somebody who lives on King Street and has noticed that the plow seems to go by her place an awful lot.
Sure.
Here's somebody who complains that the plow comes
Yeah.
by too frequently. But I was just wondering, thank you.
You don't get that complaint too often.
No, you don't.
And they could be going past that street to get to a different street as well. Typically, if you notice that any resident isn't more than about 2 blocks away from a main, during a snowstorm, we encourage them to stay home. It's not safe to travel, as everybody knows, but people do seem to want to venture out. So any residents about two blocks away from a main. Our residential routes are broken up into 7 different routes, with the downtown route being on its own. Essentially, after the snow is done, the last snow flake is fallen, we'll send our main crew out and plow curb to curb. We'll salt as needed, mains, intersections, and inclines. And typically, this will take us about 9 to 14 hours to plow the entire city after the snow has ended. Any questions on the residential routes?
Is there a way you can maybe prioritize a hill? Because I know that we do have some hills, and, it makes it difficult for residents who live on hill or have to get up a hill to get to a main road.
And we do prioritize our hills. One of the issues in Stoughton is the topography in itself is very hilly. So there's an awful lot of inclines. We do try to get the major inclines, but during the snowstorm, it's tough to get all of them and keep the mains open with the staff that we have. Believe me, we try the best we can with the amount of staff that we have. So cul-de-sacs, this is something new that we introduced. Essentially what we do is we take our loaders, we have 2 of them that have plows on them, and what we do is we deploy those into the cul-de-sacs. Before, the big plow trucks would have to go in the cul-de-sacs, and it would take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes per cul-de-sac to plow those. So what we did is we took the cul-de-sacs off those operators' routes and created a cul-de-sac route just with our loaders. And so we estimate that this could save us a route. And so what we did is we used to have 8 routes. We combined 2 routes into one, creating 7 routes, and potentially this could eliminate a plow truck. We're very cautious not to eliminate it at this point, looking at some future potential growth. We don't want to short ourselves, but we definitely are cognizant that if we can eliminate a truck, that's a huge expense that we can save. We have about 36 different cul-de-sacs. So after we're all cleaned up, everything's done in the city, plowed curb to curb, the plow operators will go home, and about 12 hours later, or that next night, we'll come back in and clean up the downtown area. So what we do is we have a snow blower, as you can see in the top right, and we have our dump trucks that ride alongside it and essentially pick up the snow. So the downtown business owners are encouraged to push all the snow out into the gutter line within 24 hours. The rest of the residents have 48 hours to clear their sidewalks. Downtown in that corridor, they have 24 hours by ordinance. And that's because we want them to clear those sidewalks and get those into the gutter pan so we can move it out and get it to the middle more efficiently. So the biggest thing downtown is that there's no terrace space for snow storage, there's limited parking, and essentially you want to be open for business as quickly as possible. And we do send a letter to our downtown business owners annually to remind them of the program. So we did that early on in November this year.
Brett,
Go ahead.
I'll go first and then say. For the downtown, at one point you had another special equipment to come do like where the wheelchairs, the ramps are, to kind of clear that off. Is that still going on?
Since I've been here, that's never been the case. I'm not sure what was told to the council previously. You're probably talking about, essentially, it's a zero-turn lawnmower that has a snow blade attached to the front. What we do downtown is we try to essentially move the snow from around the curb past the ramp as much as we can. That's the responsibility of that corner property to keep that clear.
Okay, thank you.
And where do you put the snow when you remove it from downtown?
So after we collect the snow, all that's taken via dump truck to our 4th Street storage yard. That's just south of Mant Road.
And is that adequate space for all the snow you get in the winter?
So far. If we have another winter like 2010, it could be a challenge. And then from a park standpoint, they remove snow from all city-owned buildings, city-owned sidewalks, which I mentioned. We have 56 of them. On the map, you can see all the different sidewalks that we're responsible for. And then there's KPW on the left-hand side there. So it's actually quite a bit of sidewalk that we have to maintain, and it's sporadic throughout the whole city. So that takes an awful lot of time to get our equipment to these different places, but that takes about 10 hours or so. Any questions on the parks? So salting and pre-wetting. So every truck is calibrated to only dispense about 300 to 350 pounds of salt per lane mile. And so that all comes preset from the factory. Then we do calibrate them over time to make sure they're right on. So essentially the auger only turns a certain revolution based on speed to dispense a certain amount of salt per lane mile. And also we pre-wet the salt in the salt tray. And so essentially by pre-wetting the salt, we can keep roughly 78% of the salt in the center of the street where it needs to be. So we're reducing that scatter. Before, if you don't pre-wet it, it would bounce off to the side and you're not getting the full effect. Also, the pre-wetting, which is a brine solution, activates the salt quicker. Salt needs to be somewhat wet. And then we only salt as needed. So I talked about mains, intersections, schools, churches, hospitals. Your typical residential street, we won't salt the whole street. We may do the intersections, then mid-block, then the next intersection as well. So we made a conscious effort to try to reduce the amount of salt that we use. Yep. Straight.
Thank you. With respect to how the salting works, when the truck slows down for a stop sign at an intersection, does the auger stop moving then?
Correct. It's all wheel driven.
Right. So what I'm curious about is and this is not meant to be a criticism, but I have noted that on a number of intersections in the winter, since I've been here, there are stop signs where you can thank God that you've not floated right out into the intersection. And I'm wondering, I don't know how one addresses that given the way it functions.
Sure. There is an override, or they call it, it's called a blast. And so if they hit that button, it will blast the salt and won't essentially use that wheel drive. And so that can be one thing that we do.
And I mean, if one notices some areas that are particularly troublesome, if one calls the city, does the city try to respond to that and put some additional salt in those places?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing is I'd rather have somebody call me than put something on Facebook. I can't address if it's on Facebook, but if you can call me, I can certainly talk with them and get them the help that they need.
Thank you.
And what is your cell phone number?
Yeah, I'm not gonna. Good try, though.
Jackson and Harrison, I've always noted, is bad.
Horrible.
All right. So essentially our current parking during a snow emergencies, it's tough to read on the screen there, but anytime we have 3 inches on the ground or expected, it's up to me to call a snow emergency. And so that essentially would trigger no parking on opposite sides of the street, either even or odd, for 3 consecutive nights, starting at midnight till 7 a.m. And so we work closely with PD on that, and it does take a lot of resources to enforce that program. but we really need those cars to be off the street so that we can do our job. So that's critical that they do that.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Chief?
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand with Alderperson Johnson's comment before about the 48-hour parking regulations in the city. We usually, historically, have enforced that pretty heavily in the fall time so that we get people accustomed to keeping their vehicles moving and not on a street and avoid street storage issues. Because there's also a provision of the snow emergency ordinance that a citation will be issued if you're in violation of the alternate or the opposite side or alternate side parking regulations that come in effect with the snow emergency. But after 24 hours from receiving that first citation, if your vehicle isn't moved, it is subject to towing. And usually on a significant snowfall, we will tow the vehicles to get them out of the way so the street department can plow those streets. So.
Okay, thank you.
So the way that we notify the public of a snow emergency is that they can sign up for an email notification on the city's website. So anytime that we call a snow emergency, essentially we'll send a blast out to those folks that have signed up. All the TV stations in the Madison area are contacted via email. They put those on their warning list or their notification list. Ron Burgundy will let you know that there's a snow emergency. WSTO, of course. All the regional radio stations are notified, and then they put the notification out there on the airwaves. The police department, they've been putting that on their Facebook pages, which has been helpful. I know we're working on a city Facebook page. Hopefully that'll come to fruition. We can use that as well.
And just for me and the general public, could you just review the alternate side street parking and a good way to remember what side of the street you are allowed to park on and not allowed to park on during those snow emergencies?
Sure. So after midnight, that's the biggest thing is to remember at midnight, that's when it starts. So if your address ends with an even number, it's an even day, then you can park on that side of the street. The opposite side is not allowed and will be ticketed.
So you go with whatever your street number is, and that's where you can park after
Can.
midnight.
Correct. And
But
it's
the
after
next night-
midnight, 'cause that's,
But the next night it changes.
it changes to odd.
To odd.
So that's the most confusing part is that it changes at midnight. That's when it goes into effect. So sometimes at 9 or 10 o'clock, people think that, well, I need to park on the even or odd side, but it's really that midnight when it starts. So that's the next day. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Anything you want to add?
Nope, that's very clear.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. Does Ron Burgundy now work for WSTO, or?
He may have gotten fired. I don't know.
Okay, I'm just curious,
He may
thanks.
have moved on.
Thank you.
So some of the challenges that we face, we'll go through. And one of the biggest challenges that we face is really cars in the roadway. It's awfully tough for us to do our work when we got obstacles to plow around. It leaves a wind-roll around the car. Then when they do shovel out or work their way out of there, there's a big roll of snow left in the roadway. The picture in the bottom, if we have cars parked on either side of the street, it makes it awful tough for our plows to get through, especially with the wing on it. So during a snow event, even though we have some emergency rules that go into effect, we do ask that they get their cars off the road until we can complete our work. Because essentially our snow emergency, if it's not between midnight and 7, they have every right to park on the street. But we ask that they don't so that we can get there and plow curb to curb and then be out of their way and open it up for traffic.
Go ahead, Chief.
Just maybe one comment as illustrated on there. Once the plow goes through, it usually creates a bank at the curb line, which in essence narrows the roadway width. So keeping that in mind as you get subsequent snowfalls, that stuff doesn't necessarily get pushed back until the crew has a chance to come back at either its second or third time before it gets pushed back over the curb line. So that does narrow the traffic lanes, and some of our streets are relatively narrow as it is. So it really creates a difficulty, and that's why it's just so important to keep those vehicles off the street during a snow event.
And I will add to that a lot of times that next day, that windrow is now ice. And so we do try to go back and push those over as much as possible. We can't go back to all the different streets in the whole city, but we do try to get the areas that we know are problem areas. And typically that next night it's ice, which is not good for our equipment. And if you were to hit that with your car, it could do some serious damage. The next issue that we have is residents and contractors, essentially pushing snow back into the street after we've gone through and done our job. I've never really understood this personally. After we clear the street for you, then you put it back in the street. I don't understand that. So we just ask that you essentially put the snow on the terrace or in your lawn. And then we do have issue with contractors coming out of parking lots and depositing snow on the roadway. So we do try to talk with them and essentially warn them, but it is a violation of our ordinance 6413. So it is enforceable.
And whose responsibility is it to remove the snow around fire hydrants?
The adjacent homeowner.
Okay.
I actually have one thing that's been a concern downtown at crosswalks is, and I know it's the property owners or business owners' responsibility to clean the crosswalks, but if there's a sort of gray area of time, I guess, maybe if a property or business owner, and I've talked to you about this before, property or business owner clears the sidewalk and crosswalk area before the plows have finished their job, then the plows come by later, and I don't know if you want to call it a wind roll or a bank at the curb line, and the plows then leave a pile of snow blocking the crosswalk again, but the property or business owner said, well, I did it already, I'm done.
And they're responsible to maintain that. And specifically downtown, we have issues because the county goes through, that's really a county road that they maintain when it comes to their plowing operation. And so they may come through a couple of times and they won't go curb to curb because they're just going through town. And then we come back hours later and go curb to curb, and yet the business owners say, well, I already shoveled here, and yet you guys plowed it right back. So I get it, I understand the frustration, but it is up to the property owner to maintain that throughout the duration of the storm. And we'll do everything we can to help out. We've talked about this, to clear the drains as much as we can with our blades, and to turn the blades a certain way to move the snow past the intersection. So we'll continue to do those things. It's really, it is a challenge, and I get it. There's no great solution. So I wish I had this, something to tell you that'd say, hey, we'll take care of that, but we just don't have the staff to do the sidewalks downtown, and if we do the sidewalks downtown, we may have to do them everywhere. So.
Well, we'll have to do one little piece of the downtown now, I think in about 2 weeks, since we will own that, where the former McFarland State Bank is, but.
Yep, and that's on our radar, so when we take ownership of that we do add that to our list.
Okay.
And it's on a corner too, by the way.
Yep.
Go ahead, Matt.
How is the alternate parking applied to the small number of streets that have single-sided parking? Is it still just if it's odd houses on that side, is that,
Chief,
they can only park on the odd days, or
Yeah,
is there
they
an
can only,
exception at all?
yeah, there's no exception for the streets that are already posted one side, so they just cannot park on the street during that time period. They'd have to wait 24 hours to be able to park on their side of the street again.
The other thing is on a trash day, a Tuesday or a Friday, we ask that you put the trash cans in your driveway apron, or if you shovel an area in your terrace to put the trash, but do not put them in the roadway. It's awfully tough to plow around every single trash can. So we ask that you just please get them out of the roadway so that we can plow curb to curb.
They never have to be in the roadway, do they? Because of the arms of the truck can
No.
reach them.
No, they really shouldn't be in the roadway to begin with, but we're cognizant that people do. Just during, really all the time, you should have them. Because when we do street sweeping, it's tough to sweep around garbage cans as well. So really, all the time, they should be in the apron or on the terrace area or the carriage walk. Mailboxes is a different animal. We do have some mailboxes that are installed incorrectly, so they're too close to the road. We do the curb cut with our wing plow, and if it's installed incorrectly, that wing plow may hit that mailbox. Then they call us and say, hey, you hit our mailbox, but the mailbox is really in the roadway, essentially. And so there is stipulations that the USPS does put out that needs to be 6 to 8 inches from the curb, the front of the curb, and then also between 41 and 45 inches high at the base. So if they are installed incorrectly, essentially we do not reimburse for that. If they're dilapidated or rotten, we do not reimburse for that. If we take one out, we'll own it, we'll take care of you, but if it's installed incorrectly or rotten, we're not going to. Any questions on mailboxes? Another challenge that we have is, with the staff that we have, we do work long hours during an event. We really struggle when we have a long duration event. I think 2 years ago we had an event that was 3 days long. That's very taxing on a crew of essentially 9. I'll hop in a plow truck. I will continue to do so if I need to. But it's very hard on our staff for a long duration. So essentially we do during the storm, we break it down into 4-hour shifts to keep those mains open like we talked about. And then after it's all completed, we come back in and do another 9 to 14-hour shift depending on the snowfall. Then after we go home after that, then we do downtown. So it could be 4 days worth of plowing and erratic sleep, and it's no fun waking up at midnight coming in and plowing for 14 hours. It does take a toll. So that brings me to be patient, slow down. Snow has to be plowed curb to curb. We get a lot of people that take exception to us plowing into their driveway. I'm not really sure where else to put it. If we had big melters on the front of our plows, that would be fantastic, but we don't, so it has to go somewhere. And just be cognizant that after these guys plow for 9 to 14 hours, guys and gals, then they have to go home and shovel their own driveway. And typically by that time, it's all frozen. So if you see a plow driver, no plow driver, tell them thank you, because they really go through the gamut to keep our roads safe. Any questions? Comments, concerns? Great.
Just in time for tonight, right?
Yeah, we are expecting rain, sleet, and about an inch of snow into tomorrow morning. Snow is really not the issue. It's really freezing rain, which is very dangerous, black ice. And we talk about salt, freezing rain takes probably just as much salt as a 4 to 6 inch snowfall. So I'd rather have snow than freezing rain, because people can see snow as well. You can't see freezing rain. So slow down tonight. Take it easy tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you.
Merci.
All right, the next item on the agenda is public comment period. And we do have one person registered to speak. It looks like it's Kathy Camp. You can come on up and give us your full name and address and let us know what's on your mind tonight.
My name's Kathy Camp. I'm with the Wisconsin Partnership for Housing Development. Our address is 2045 Atwood Avenue in Madison. But we own the property at 309 at the corner of Pine Street and Main Street. And I'm here tonight really just to urge your support for the change in zoning at 1125 West Main Street, which is that corner property. With the zoning change, that will allow us to be able to build 4 units of affordable housing on that corner. We've received funding from the county in order to do that. We're in the process of getting the loan funding, and the city has also given us some funding to support that project. So I would just ask that, that you positively consider this change in zoning so that we're able to continue to move forward with the project. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we don't have anybody else registered to speak, but we're certainly will welcome anybody that would like to come up and address the council. And I don't see anybody else, so we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the consent agenda. And I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Move to approve.
And there's a motion by Jensen,
Second.
second by Bartlett. Would anybody like anything removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Thank you. That takes us to old business, and the only item on there is ordinance 28 of 2018, and this is coming from the Planning Commission. Alderperson Bartlett.
Ordinance 28 of 2018, ordinance amending the zoning classification of 1125 West Main Street, in the city of Stoughton, Wisconsin, and I'd move to approve.
Okay.
There's a motion and a second by Alderperson Jensen. Any discussion on this item? Alderperson Borza?
I just want to say that I'm on a HATS committee, which is the Housing Advocacy Team of Stoughton, and I fully support this. This is the this is reference to what Kathy just talked about. Kathy Camp just talked about in public comment period.
Main Street Cafe here in the
Okay,
hotel.
thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Takes us to new business. And a resolution 197 of 2018 comes from Park and Recreation Committee. That would be Alderperson Hirsch.
Sure. This is R 197, 2018, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve the comprehensive outdoor recreation plan 2018 to 2022. And this was approved by Parks and Rec 4-0. And I so move.
Second?
Second by Alderperson Reeves.
No, that was,
Durancic.
I'm sorry, Durancic. All right, and Alderperson Hirsch?
This is a 5-year plan that comes around every, obviously, 5 years, and we have both Blake and, well,
They're up at the table now.
there
They
they are.
moved.
I was like, wait, they were over here. That are here that wrote the plan, and we've, so if anybody has any questions on the plan, any suggestions.
And I think Dan's
entertain
going to
that.
introduce our guest, and then he's going to go through a kind of a brief presentation.
Sure, so this is Blake Tyson. He's from Ayers and Associates. We contracted out to have the park and open space plan done, and we've been working on it together since May, and it's I've been thankful he's been doing a little bit at a time for us instead of putting it all on my plate at once, because it's pretty busy this summer.
Good. So yeah, my name is Blake. I'm a landscape architect and planner with Ayers Associates based out of Madison here, just up the road. So my sole focus of my career is in park and rec planning, so I don't have to be burdened with the other non-parky things in the world. So I'm pretty passionate about what I do, and hopefully we can provide some assistance to you guys moving forward here with Dan's plan. So tonight what I wanted to do is keep this real brief to about an hour and a half or so. I'm gonna go through a quick overview of the process and the project. I'll show you what the report looks like. If you haven't cracked the binder or opened the PDF file, I'll give you a real quick summary of what's in it. I'll go over some of the online survey results here, and then show you how we framed out our recommendations, both in the general, so the system-wide, and individual park scale recommendations. Show you some of the critical mapping in the plan and help you understand why we look at those pieces of data, and then finish up with showing you where we think your efforts should be in future park expansions and concept planning. So if you haven't ever seen a CORP, it stands for Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. It's a true planning document that helps municipalities understand how to get through 5 years of capital improvements in the park world, right? So you probably have seen your streets plan and your other public works plans. This is solely dedicated to your park and open space and trails, okay? It's also a useful tool when you pursue outside funding for implementation, AKA grants, right? So the DNR has various pots of money that they will dole out for projects that fit their mission, nature-based recreation, okay? And if you have a corp that's within that 5-year valid window, it makes you eligible for those funds. So if you fall outside of your expiration window, then you're not eligible, right, for even the applications. So one of the tools that we provide with our corp plans is a pretty detailed CIP, or capital improvements plan, for the parks that then Dan can fold into his budget and know, okay, over the next 5 years I need to allocate X dollars per year, and we frame it out very clearly as to where in the city and where in the parks that money is going. So as Dan said, we started off in May. We picked a really wet week to go out and do our field work, but we had a lot of wet weeks this spring, it seems. So we spent some time in all of your parks and facilities getting to know what's there and observing some use patterns. We actually like the wet days so we can see where your drainage issues are on the site, so it makes it nice for us. Please don't take our photographs personally, right? We like to show you where the issues are in case you haven't seen them in person. We had a public survey open for a month. Sorry, that date is wrong. It was from
June to July.
Yeah, June to July. Sorry, I have my May wrong there. So we had a month of open window, and we had over 700 responses, which was a really good response rate. So we came back with our preliminary recommendations in July, and then met with the Park Commission in September and showed them the draft report. Went through that pretty detailed. Came back late September with our CIP recommendations, and then submitted our final report to Dan and his board in November for their review and approval. So we have 4 chapters in our report. Chapter 1 gives you a brief overview. If you don't want to read all 200 and some pages, you can just focus on the executive summary, and gives you a nice sort of summary of what's going on in the community. We established some goals and objectives in conjunction with the Park Commission. Spent quite a bit of time trying to make sure the wording was right on that, because that really gives you the framework for why you come up with the recommendations, right? What are we trying to accomplish over the next 5 years, and what is truly attainable, right? We don't want to set our goals too lofty that we're going to fail. No one likes to fail in the world. So Chapter 1 also includes a review of some of the other pertinent planning documents that relate to your parks and trails. So for example, the comprehensive plan, the state corp, some of the other regional plans that influence adjacent lands to Stoughton. The Chapter 1 also gives an overview of the public survey results, and if you are into raw data and numbers, we have included all of the public comments and raw survey data in the appendix of the plan. So if you want to pour through that, it's there for you. Chapter 1 also goes over all the demographics at various levels in the community. And I'll show you, we analyze that a little bit further later. Chapter 2 gets into the inventory and the analysis of your facilities, your assets, right? So we look at all the properties you own. We categorize them into different classifications, which is based on the National Park and Rec system. So we have mini parks, neighborhood parks, community parks, special use, and conservancy. So all your facilities land into one of those pots, and then we use that data later on. We look at the service area for each of those sites. What I mean by service area is the distance we could reasonably assume someone to travel to use that type of facility. So as you can imagine, the larger the type of park, right? So a mini park, a neighborhood park, and a community park, your service area grows with each scale increase of your park types. And I'll show you those maps here in a minute. We also get into your bike and ped connections throughout the community and how those tie into, again, adjacent communities. Chapter 3 gets into our recommendations, and we always start off with a general kind of system-wide set of recommendations, whether that be implementing recycling or trash receptacle standardization, or consistent park signage, or oftentimes I'll see bicycle racks located in the grass or in mulch beds, and really those should always be on hardscape areas, so concrete or asphalt. So that type of stuff shows up in the general recommendations. And then Chapter 3 also goes into quite a bit of depth in the individual. I'm going to skip here for a second. So we create an asset summary sheet for each one of your facilities. So on one page, you can see pretty clearly we have a key image that helps identify the park. We have a list of all of your assets. So we have 7 park benches, we have 14 parking stalls, that type of thing happens here. The next category shows you all the issues that we see, right? So you have drainage issues on ball diamond number 1, or you have inadequate amount of safety surfacing under the play structure. Whatever the issues are, they all show up here. The bottom of the page is where we outline our recommendations to fix those issues. And we spent a lot of time with Dan and his staff going through this, making sure that we're not missing things that they see on a day-to-day basis. Because the reality is I get a snapshot of your system in a very limited window. So we made sure we tried to cover everything. And then you'll see all those recommendations are tied to dollar figures to get them done. And those dollars then show up again in our CIP tables that I mentioned earlier. So let me flip back a couple slides here. So these are some of the images I was mentioning. Please, again, don't take offense. I try to capture a lot of the good things and a lot of the bad things. I view a corp as a tool for Dan to come to you and say, hey, I have some issues, I need help, I need some money to get them fixed. And we have a bunch of fun images to help him defend that. So I'm not trying to point out things you're doing wrong, that's not the intent. Again, some of the general recommendations here, the bike racks I mentioned, drinking fountains are important to have in our public spaces. And more specifically, if as we try to accomplish some of our ADA non-compliance issues, drinking fountains are an easy one to overlook. To be truly compliant, you need both a high and a low bowl drinking fountain. Right? A lot of communities I work with come in, I come in to help, and they say, oh, we just installed 17 brand new drinking fountains. Look how shiny they are. Oh, unfortunately, all of those are non-compliant because we only have one bowl, right? So that's one of the things that I tried to point out. We spent some time looking at some of the ADA issues and trying to make sure that people can get through your parks and to the facilities on ADA compliant pathways, sidewalks, trails. And you're in pretty good shape. There were a couple spots that we pointed out, but you do have a nice network that exists. So one of the other big things was the play equipment. Yeah, there we go. A lot of communities, you're not alone here, went through a time frame of replacing all their play structures at the same time. There must have been a huge sale from the vendors or something. Unfortunately, they're all aging out at the same time as well. So what I've tried to do is give you a staggered replacement schedule so that you're not replacing 10 at the same time. You're right, we do 1 or 2 a year over the next X years, and that gets you into a regular cycle moving forward. So hopefully when Dan retires, this document is still intact and we have that schedule still continuing. Right, 2 years and you're out? All right, so as you can see, here's a good example of a play structure that is past its prime. This happens in a couple spots. So things like this need to be replaced. And actually this one might be top of the list, I think. So. One of the other issues, some of the sport courts, and this is very common again, we get some cracking through the surface, and unfortunately, if those cracks are not handled quickly, they just become increasingly problematic as water starts to get in those cracks and into your stone base, and that just increases the amount of heaving. So we want to make sure we jump on that pretty quickly and get them sealed up. Here's some of the drainage issues we were fortunate enough to see on our wet day. Okay, so I mentioned the asset summary sheet, so it shows up here. I always try and give a back, either we have 2 pages or 3 or 4, depending on how many images and how big the park is. Again, to show you some of the things that are good, some of the things that are not so good that need improvement. So there's a lot of graphics and images in this plan. All right, chapter 4 tells you how to get all this done, right? It is very common that we'll come up with a list longer than a 5-year realistic forecast, right? So when you look at the CIP, there's probably more dollar signs there than you want to take on in a 5-year window. That's common. We want to make sure that you have that menu so that if all of a sudden you stumble into a whole pile of money, let's say someone gifts the city $1 million for the park improvements, you have a list of things to go to start spending that money down. Does that make sense?
Yep.
We outline a bunch of outside funding sources, whether it be grants or private-public partnerships, different ways to leverage your dollars to try and get some of these things implemented sooner rather than later. So there's a whole series of pages that are allocated to that. Oh boy, that is hard to read. So I'll go through the online survey results here. Again, we had 711 respondents in that month in the summer, which I thought was a very good response rate. I'm going to go over a couple of questions. I won't go over all of them here tonight, but what park or trail do you use most often? Mant was by far the most frequently cited, followed by the trail system. So I don't think that's a big surprise to those of you who are out and about using this system, but it was nice to see, especially with the energy that's going into plans on the waterfront and Mant Park. So,
What page are you on right now?
well, it would be in chapter 2.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't have a page number necessarily in front of me, but chapter 2 is where we have all the survey results.
Well, not all the survey results, just selected survey results. If you want the whole survey, it should be in the appendix.
Correct, thank you. Good correction. We asked a question about what facilities or amenities that we'd like to see added in the community. And again, trails were very high, and availability of restrooms was number 2. So, and that's very typical. I would say 90% of corps I do, those are the top 2 that come through. Often followed by either aquatic facilities or play structures, and number 3 is playground improvements. Oh, this got small on my screen. All right, next question. What is the most important thing to add or increase in the system? And again, the trail network, bike and ped facilities. Sorry, I don't have my glasses here. Oh, and waterfront facilities. So fishing piers, canoe kayak launch, and just in general public access to the water, which I think is good. It's very consistent with the other projects that you're discussing as a community. So of the top 6 priorities, the Riverwalk was very high. The Whitewater Park was number 1. The baseball diamonds and the playgrounds came in at 3 and 4. And the trail network and protecting natural areas finished out the 5 and 6. So we looked at the age demographics from the respondents, and about 65% were in that prime family age, right, with the 30 to 55. So it was a real high response rate there, and then another 16% came into the 20s to 30s. So pretty typical response rate, very heavily weighted in the family corridor. We asked the question about is there interest in potentially increasing fees or taxes to help pay for some of these implementation concepts, and I was very surprised at the high rate of positive response. And we asked, what dollar threshold would be acceptable, and about half of the respondents selected the highest dollar category that we presented, which was encouraging. So, do you guys have any other questions on the survey before I move on from that one? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when you're talking about who responded in the survey, how does that match up with the population of Stoughton? Your survey was answered by people middle age, and isn't there a high percentage of more senior people in Stoughton?
Yep, that's a very good point. It doesn't surprise me that the family age folks had the highest rate of response. They're oftentimes the primary user group of our parks and trails, closely followed by the senior population. So I guess it doesn't surprise me, especially because it was an online forum. Usually you'll get a younger demographic responding.
Thank you.
Alderperson Boersma?
Just a question about, you had mentioned that aquatic center was one of the top priorities that were responded to, and whether people are satisfied with the aquatic center that we have now, or did you get an indication that the city generally was split on wanting a swimming pool or an in-ground
so there was
rather than with a beach?
There was a lot of interest in a splash pad, which surprised me because you just built one. And so I don't know if it was a fact that people weren't aware that it was now open, or whether they just wanted another one and they liked it so much. I'm not sure.
Okay, so really people didn't respond to the fact that they want a swimming pool?
No, I didn't see a lot of that. It was more about the splash pad. It just kept coming up. So I guess I'd take that as a compliment that they liked the one you just built. But I like to be optimistic, right?
Yeah. Any other questions? I had a couple comments. First of all, I wanted to thank Dan for the effort that he put into the survey part of it especially. And I have to say that the committee members were really engaged in this whole process. I mean, literally, Regina and Denise came to the meetings with pages of notes to add, and I think that was really, beneficial for these guys through the process. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think you guys, we went through the survey, 4 or 5 different times, and I think the questions improved each time. I'm actually looking at using some of them in other communities. I hope that's okay. I'll send you our royalty check. It'll be a nickel. All right, some of the maps that are included in the plan. I mentioned earlier our classification systems that are based on the NRPA. We have the mini, neighborhood, community, special use, and conservancy. And this graphic shows you how those service areas all overlap. And in a perfect world, which doesn't exist, I would have all of these different colored circles completely overlapping each other. So I would have perfect walkable access to all scales of parks, right? It never happens. If I have good coverage on the community with different types of circles, I feel pretty good about it. Because the reality is a community park, you're probably getting in your car to drive to. It's a destination facility, right? You're going to take your kids to play soccer or softball, or I'm going to the skate park or whatever it may be. It's probably not a walkable park. So as I look at the community, we have 3 little windows of area that are not covered by a service area. But if you look, it's very hard to see. Each of those areas have little symbols that are placeholders for future parks as the community continues to develop. And that's from your comprehensive plan. So there was good forward planning during the comp process to plug those holes. So we worked with city staff to make sure that our bike trail and bike route map reflected the colors and line types that are already adopted in other planning documents, so we weren't introducing another scheme. So this should be very consistent with your other documents that you have, so no surprises there. So we have added a few recommended connections, nothing surprising. I think it's filling some of the low-hanging fruit gaps. Another tool that we like to provide in a corp is this facility distribution map, and we get a lot of requests from realtors in communities for this graphic, because as they start to show homes to prospective families, they want to know where are the playgrounds, where are the tennis courts, where are the basketball courts. So this map shows you where in the community all these facilities are by type. So it's a really quick way to get a handle on what's happening where. So we did look at the population density here. You can start to see the darker the area, the higher the density in the community. So it shouldn't be a big surprise to you guys if you know where all the housing clusters are. But we think that's important as we look at where to spend your dollars. So you remember my service area graphic 3 slides ago, right? I take those circles of service area and I overlay it with population density, and that gives me an inverse map of where we have the biggest gaps. So now the darkest colors on this map show me where the highest need for new facilities or improved facilities are. Does that make sense? I'm inverting the data to get the picture that I want. So you can see a couple spots right through here where we have a much higher density of need, and then another spot up here, which is good. That falls in line with where your proposed future facilities are going to be. So that works really well. Speaking of proposed facilities, this graphic shows you kind of a quick snapshot of where we're recommending new facilities to go through your system. And so we've got a key over here that gives you the symbol. And if you want more information about each of these sites, you can refer back to the individual sheets in Chapter 3. But if you wanted a quick tool to say, okay, where are we looking at improvements, this gives it to you in a graphic form. All right, so I mentioned earlier about those future parks. These are those symbols that were overlaid in that earlier graphic. This came straight out of the comprehensive plan, so these shouldn't be a surprise. I did circle 2 for you tonight, right in the heart of the current discussion with the Whitewater Park and the riverfront. I think that's a very important area to focus attention on here in the next planning cycle. So as you move forward with planning these future parks, it's very important to develop a plan for each one, much like you did initially with the Whitewater Park. So many communities will go out and buy a whole bunch of park benches or a playground and just plop it in a new park, or they may inherit that scenario from a developer. I strongly urge you to spend the time as a group and go through some sort of basic planning process so that you have an understanding of how these facilities relate to each other. To me, the most important thing about how parks function is how people relate to each other in those spaces. And so going through a planning process like this, to me, is very, very important. If you're spending the money on facilities, make sure you put them in the right spot. So with that, I will stop talking at you and take any questions you might have on our process.
All right, who wants to be first? Alderperson Reeves.
I just had a question as far as going forward. Will this be then a working document that stays with Parks and Rec? Oh, sorry, I guess I'm asking Dan and the group, but is this going to be a working document that Parks and Recs just keeps, or Parks and Rec keeps looking at? And I know it's not going to end up on the shelf, but I'm just wondering about then, now what happens next?
Yeah, so you use it to implement the plan, and it'd be used by both us and then also Public Works, because they do a lot of like playground replacements and things like that. So when Blake was talking about like the CIP plan, as far as our playground replacements, that would fall under Public Works. So it would help both of our departments.
And I plan to give Dan the Excel sheet that we have, which breaks out the 5-year CIP plan. So as he starts to accomplish some of these projects, he can, kind of check them off the list and move things around as he needs for priorities. But yeah, we envision this to be very much a working document for Dan and his crew.
Anything else? I had Alderperson Johnson, and then City Attorney has something.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. I have a question. So on the survey where you said the people that use the parks, one of my concerns is, I think it's called Criddle. Is that the name of it, Dan? There wasn't even a mention that anyone uses that park, and I know that there's been some things going on where I think the people that have been doing the maintenance for it for a while are, it's kind of like a lot of people pitch in there. And my concern is the money is going to the right parks. And I noticed that in 2019 on page, I think it's 124, that we're going to be doing $150,000 for replacement of equipment. And I just didn't know if that was the best use of money, going for a park that is isolated for the neighborhood, pretty much, and it's not being really well used. So that's just a thought, that as far as money.
Well, sure. So we're doing a playground renovation project next year. It's going to be a natural adventure playground, and we have $45,000 budgeted for it. And talking with contractors who do that type of work, they say it's enough money to do it. So, and also that park's used as a bus stop for a local elementary school. So every day there's 25 kids there.
Okay.
Using it before and after school.
So they just didn't answer the survey?
They just didn't answer the survey.
Get on them. So that's what my concern was, like where the money is going compared to your survey.
Yeah, these processes are tough because you can't reach everyone. So we do the best we can. We look at all the different data sets we can collect, make our best recommendations. Things like the bus stop use is kind of one of those that's hard to quantify on a data set, but it's very important as you start to spend that money. So it's a good question.
Okay.
And the $150,000 for a replacement, you can spend $40,000, you can spend $4 million on a playground, right? I've seen them all. For neighborhood and community scale parks, you're probably in the $100,000 to $150,000 range for a big structure that would be swings, play structures, surfacing, especially if you're going to do an ADA, facility with poured in place rubber. So I like to plug in a higher number, and if that can be scaled back, that's.
I guess I was trying to look at your survey and what you want us to go by, and then I see the 150 going to a park that is not even on the radar.
But you also have to take a look at where the park is and the fact that it's in an older neighborhood. And, if you take a close look at the maps, you'll see that there's very few parks in a lot of the older neighborhoods because parks weren't required. A lot of the parks are in the newer development, like the 1980s and the 1990s. And so Criddle Park actually serves a very dense population because it's in the older section of the town, and the older section of the town has a very high density compared to the newer sections of the town. So you have to really study those maps that he was showing. Those are excellent, excellent maps, the overlay maps of population and things like that. So that's something that the committee has to really take a really close look at to do a lot of the balancing of where we put the monies.
I think the city attorney had your hand up.
My question is Dan, Does this plan create an opportunity to review what we're doing for fee in lieu of land dedication for parks and park impact fees? I've seen these plans provide an opportunity to evaluate whether our fees are aligned the way they should be from a needs assessment standpoint. Has any thought been given to the relationship between this planning and those things that we have in our ordinances? I don't know how long it's been since those have been looked at.
There was a survey sent out through the Parks Director for Wanakee. She did a survey with all the local communities this past January, and we were right in the middle of all the different communities. But yeah, it's something that I've thought about as far as, should we do a study to figure out if we should raise our impact fees or not.
Okay. I think I had Alderperson Bartlett and then Riley.
I just had a question, I guess, or a comment about the recommendation for the pool or aquatic center. I guess you mentioned that there was some interest in that, and I know we're not talking about doing it right now because of financial reasons, but I guess I don't really support putting out in Racetrack Park. To me, their demographic maps show it more the families and kids more in the center and west side of the city, and I don't like Racetrack Park because you have to cross some major roads. There's some sections without sidewalks. It's not really a safe park to get to for kids if they want to get there in the summer months. So I guess in the future, when we do possibly look at that when financials, when the money's there, I would rather look at that like Man Park or somewhere else more centralized. It would be more accessible safely for kids and people around the community.
2 weeks ago, I met with a pool contractor who builds these, and as part of their feasibility study, they'll figure out where to actually place it in your community.
Okay, great, thanks.
Alderperson Riley.
Thank you, Mayor. This is for Dan, really. Dan, I note that Norris Park indicates it has a skating rink. Does it anymore?
It does. We have a short season due to, we have had pretty mild winters. I
Yeah.
think last season we were open, or last winter we were open for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Does anybody maintain it, though, at all? Is there any dedication to maintaining the ice?
Yeah, the Public Works maintains it. And
Okay.
they also work with a volunteer who helps make
Do-
the ice surface.
Thanks. Do they have hockey rink boards anymore there?
There's no boards.
Okay. Has there ever been a thought about putting an ice skating rink down near Man Park in that area that would be more centralized and have some lighting and possibly could be maintained?
Yeah, we've thought about it, and yeah, it's.
Okay. The reason I ask is that it's near and dear to my heart, honestly. I'm an old hockey guy, and I still skate in the winter. I go down to Vilas and Madison, and I don't think we have any decent winter recreation ice skating facility in the town, which is not meant to say, my gosh, what are you doing? But we just don't, and I guess it's not a priority for whatever reason, but I would think that it's something that would enhance the quality of life in Stoughton during the winter if we were to have some decent ice skating facility, and I see Brett's eager to tell me
He's
something
another
about
hockey guy.
it. Oh, well,
fellow hockey
let's get together. Yeah.
And we have looked at outdoor ice, and southern Wisconsin is really not that conducive to outdoor ice. I grew up playing on a lagoon, an outdoor ice facility in the Bloyd area.
Cool.
And so it is near and dear to my heart. So Pat and I have talked about essentially installing some sort of a liner, because our biggest issue at Norris Park is that when it thaws, all that water goes out. It's a huge waste. And so now if we can purchase a liner, and we've been looking at different options that are relatively cost effective, that we can put that liner in, so when it does thaw, essentially that pool stays put, it actually creates better ice. So we've been looking at that and how we can better the outdoor rink. We've also talked about different locations in the city too. And Man Park was one of those locations.
Okay. Yeah, because, well, last year, at least as far as Vilas goes, it was a good season. I mean, I skated for quite a number of weeks. Sure. And I do understand, I've been skating outdoors since I was like 3 years old or whatever the heck I was. But there are seasons that are good, and I understand there are problems with the season when you get the thaw, et cetera, et cetera. But it's something that I think has been deficient in this city. I've lived here now for 20 plus years, and I've always thought, my gosh, why don't we have anything worthwhile in the winter, at least from my standpoint? And I know at one time that the Stoughton Youth Hockey Organization was interested in having something cooperating with the city to have a rink put on, maybe where that baseball diamond is or wherever you guys think it would go down there. And they could actually Zamboni it and the whole trip. So anyway, it's just something I wanted to bring up and something that I think would really be beneficial.
It's on the radar.
Cool, thank you.
All right, Alderperson Boersma.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I found it fascinating that you had talked about that people are willing to pay for potentially some fees for park usage and all that. And I've raised this before, just in terms of Whitewater Park, that we'll be installing a fairly expensive structure on the river, and that there is really no way to collect fees for people using that particular structure. And it just seems to me that that if we're going to be spending that kind of money as a city, that we should be able to at least reap some benefits from maybe some public usage for that, as opposed to just renting out kayaks or whatever. It seems to me that there should be some way to charge something for that. We charge for swimming facilities, and what we can't charge for a very expensive system like we're intending to put in. And I don't know why exactly. It's because it's a public waterway, and it just seems kind of ridiculous to me, actually, that we're not able to charge anything for the use.
I think Alderperson Hirsch has a response for you.
Well, and Dan can chime in too. Well, you had it right, Sid. You can't charge to use a public waterway. I mean, you're already paying taxes with that. Secondly, with the kayak rentals, we're hoping to recoup some of the costs of the park. So we can't charge them to use a river that's illegal, but we can charge them to rent equipment. So that's what we're trying to do. Dan, do you have anything else?
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Or I think this is something that, Park and Rec, I imagine at a future meeting, you're going to probably outline some priorities and maybe put together a process. And we can probably expect to hear from you often as far as your progress and your requests in order to implement the plan. Thanks for everything you did, Blake. I think it turned out really well.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I think that's it. All right, so we do have a motion and a second on the table to approve the plan. If there's no further questions, all in favor of the plan, say aye.
Aye.
Any None opposed, that carries. Thanks, guys.
Merci.
Item number 7 is R-198 of 2018, and this comes from the Planning Commission. Alderperson Bartlett.
Resolution 198 of 2018, approving an extraterritorial jurisdictional land division request by Robert Lang for property located at 1848 U.S. Highway 51, Town of Dunn, Dane County, Wisconsin. I move to approve.
Second.
I heard a second by Jensen. Any discussion on this one, Matt?
The materials are in the packet. If you have any questions about it, it's just another, since it's within our territorial jurisdiction, we have some authority on this. It did pass the Planning Commission last night, a recommendation for approval. That's all I would say.
It's basically some property that's out by the church heading out of town toward McFarland. They want to split some land and do some use out there. And they asked us to facilitate it on kind of a short notice, and we have no reason not to accommodate it. So that's why it's here tonight after being at Planning Commission last night. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. R-199 comes from Public Works. Go ahead, Matt.
Resolution 199, 2018, sidewalks for 2019 street reconstruction project. Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second, and discussion on this one. Go ahead, Denise, and I know Brett's still here, so he can kind of really run us through this as well.
There is no recommendation on Patterson Street, or is there a recommendation?
The sidewalk will be included on Patterson per the policy. Essentially, these are for things that we will not include, like Lowell Street on the south side of the road.
So are we putting a sidewalk on the south side of Patterson or not?
So, so essentially, there currently is no sidewalk on the south side of Patterson. And forgive me, Rodney could be here tonight. This is kind of, when it comes to assessments with sidewalks, this is kind of his deal, so forgive me.
My notes say,
So
yeah.
the project is to infill sidewalk on the south side of Patterson. And so when we talk about the resolution, it's to not infill on the south side of Lowell
Okay.
Street.
Well, I have a recommendation, because looking at these recommendations that have been presented to us tonight, I think that when we retrofit sidewalks or infill, that we really should have a criteria in the policy to help decide if there needs to be a one or two sides of the street sidewalks. Because our comp plan actually is pretty clear about two-sided sidewalks. And let me read the comp plan to you. On page 108 of the comp plan, it says, the heading is Expand Sidewalk System. And it says the city should require sidewalks on both sides of all existing and proposed collector streets and on both sides of key routes to schools, parks, and other community facilities with heavy foot traffic. And quite frankly, that is not really reflected in our policy. And I think the policy should actually state what is in our comp plan. And then I think as part of the policy, we should then have, as part of the policy, criteria that we would be using when we are doing infill or retrofitting sidewalks. You know, and the criteria that it appears would be best to look at and to actually be in the policy so the public knows what we're using as criteria should be things like physical barriers, design challenges, foot traffic. I mean, I have to give you an example. I live on a street that's 250 feet long. I am the only resident on the street, and according to the policy, you at some point will put sidewalks on both sides of my street, and there's very little foot traffic. So it seems to me we should be taking into consideration foot traffic, costs for construction and maintenance of sidewalks, and also the whole issue of retaining walls needs to be somehow addressed.
Let me just interrupt you. We're not here tonight to discuss the policy. We're here tonight to discuss the recommendations. I was on city council for 7 years, and for 7 years, every year this came up to discuss the policy, and to this point, nobody has come to the committee meeting and recommended these changes. And I don't think this is the place to try to do that tonight. So, I mean, if you want to discuss the policy, I think it should go back to the committee level, and you should bring those to the committee. What we're talking about here tonight is really simply the recommendations that came based on the policy as it is today, and we're not going to be changing the policy tonight. So if you don't want to act on these, you would have to basically table it, go back, change the policy, and bring it back. I don't think that's a very efficient way of doing business. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, I was just
Alderperson
pointing out.
Bartlett.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to comment a little bit on that. I agree with you, we do need to look at putting some criteria in our plans, but tonight's not the night for that. These changes that are implemented here, we tried to head off, because every year that comes up with the assessments once they put these in, and we tried to head off, and Rodney did a great job of looking at these ahead of time so we don't get to the last minute and have design changes once they're starting to install this and we start getting some outcry. These were implemented, or these recommendations were made because of design issues that were identified, some old growth problem. There were some old growth trees we didn't want to remove for some of the sidewalks. We want to be careful about taking out if we could avoid it. There were some right-of-way issues where the right-of-way doesn't line up with the streets on one of these. So we would have to get some easements that would be difficult on a couple of them. So we can go through these one by one if we want to, but these had some good criteria for design reasons that caused some challenges. So it did have some reasons behind it. So if there's any specifics, we can get into a little bit. But Ronnie's the expert, of course, he's not here, but I'll try and cover anything if you have questions on individual ones here. So, thanks.
Alderperson Borzman?
I do think that we need to look at our policy. We need to look at it probably at the level of basic planning, because I think we are going to come up with some problems with streets if we keep this policy of, at least the stated policy of having sidewalks on both sides. I think that that's something we need to look at as a council, because I think it requires attention, and probably sooner than later. I'm not sure that it requires attention, full attention tonight, but I think we need to look at that. I think it's a policy that is probably outlived its usefulness in some areas, and I think we need to look at it.
And we are pretty far along in the design process too, because we do follow the current policy on the books when we ask our engineering firm to take a look at this and to implement sidewalks.
I don't have problems with that. I just was pointing out.
Understood.
Alderperson Riley?
Thank you, Mayor. From the standpoint of procedure with respect to addressing the policy concerns that Alderperson Durancheck raised, and I realize we're not going to address those fully tonight, what would be that procedure? I don't know who I'm asking that. Perhaps I'm asking of you,
They
Brett.
could go back to Public Works to be reconsidered and talk to different issues, and I would ask that you come if we put that on the agenda for a future meeting.
I'm requesting that it be put on the agenda, and I'm emailed specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Alderperson Hirsch?
Hi. I can get into the policy issues. I'm gonna, and maybe Alderperson Bartlett would know, because this goes back to Denise's first question. What is the recommendation from Patterson Street? Because it says the committee is going to discuss. All the rest say the committee recommends what to do on a street, and Patterson is the one that is left kind of up in the air. And if we're about to vote on this, we kind of need to know what it is.
We did vote to leave Patterson with sidewalk on the south side. We did look at it, and we didn't see there weren't any design challenges. There weren't any circumstances that we saw that called for deviating from policy.
Okay.
So we will do sidewalks on that.
All right, so that needs to be amended in this thing.
And to acquire right-of-way was not an issue either.
Okay.
Like Lowell Street, we have to acquire additional right-of-way to put sidewalk in.
No, that's great. I just wanted to make sure that when we pass this, that Holly has it corrected.
It's not a deviation.
It's not a deviation.
I don't think
It's in there. It's in the resolution.
Is it?
Yeah.
I would like to amend the resolution slightly. There was one change.
Okay.
In that, which paragraph? In the sixth paragraph down, whereas deviation from policy is planned as follows, it says sidewalk is only to be filled on the west side of Grant Street from Prospect Street to Taft Street. I'd like to strike that part of the sentence. Strike the sidewalk is to only be filled on the west side of Grant Street from Prospect Street to Taft Street. That part of the project has been moved to 2020.
Yep. Good catch.
So we'll be reviewing
So
that
a
again at a later
second for
time.
that amendment? A second by President Majewski. So we'll discuss that maybe a little bit. I mean, you just explained it, and you can certainly go through that as well.
They go through the process again in 2020 to evaluate that street.
Yeah, I think, well, originally we were going to do a pulverization in that section, and then next year we were going to do a reconstruction right down the road. So the idea would be just to do a total reconstruction on both next year and do it all at once, and that's why the amendment is in order.
It really needs, after reevaluation, it needs a full reconstruct versus a pulverization. And from an economy of scale standpoint, we need to combine them, both sections of Grant, essentially from Taft to Prospect, to be more efficient that way.
Is that what you heard at that meeting?
I doggone it, I wasn't aware of it. I was down at the Capitol taking care of some business down there with respect to what's going on in our state. But, so I'll be at the next one.
Okay.
Thank you. But may I ask a question?
Sure,
Mayor?
yep.
Thank you. I'm somewhat confused as to exactly what the heck we're voting on now then.
Right now, we're voting on the amendment, which is to remove that,
Oh, that's,
that portion of the project
okay, thank you.
that Matt outlined. Did you catch that, Holly?
That's my house, so I won't
The
vote
west
on
side
that.
of that part.
I think so. Matt, so it's only the west side of Grant Street?
Correct, from Prospect to Taft.
Yep, that's what Holly has as the amendment. Any question on the amendment? All right, we'll vote on that. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. The amendment carries, so it takes us back to the original.
Your Honor, I apologize. May I abstain from that particular vote? Thank you.
Sure,
Thank
you
you.
can. Yep, that is your neighborhood, isn't it?
It's my, yep, it sure is. There's two houses, one of them's mine.
Okay.
Double wide.
So then we're back to the original resolution as amended. So the original one with that section struck out. Alderperson Dransick.
Yes, I will not support installation of sidewalks on the south side of Patterson Street. If any of you are familiar with Patterson Street, it's about 2 blocks long. It ends at Monroe Street and Harrison Street. It basically has very little traffic, very little foot traffic, and we're going to install sidewalk. We're going to have more impermeable surface. We're going to incur more costs for the taxpayer when they already have a sidewalk in this area. I mean, this is a perfect example of why we need to look at this policy, because we don't need to put sidewalks on both sides of this street. It just it isn't needed, and it's costly.
Are you making a motion to table?
No, I would make a motion to strike south side of Patterson's.
That'd be a deviation from policy.
And that, and the council has the, they're authorized to do that. So there was a motion, was there a second?
I second.
So there's a second on the amendment. Any discussion on that? Alderperson Bartlett?
We did have a discussion about that at Public Works, and that the city has decided to be a bikeable, walkable city and implement sidewalks as much as possible. And that's what I believe drove the policy. I don't know what year it was implemented, but we were following the current policy. This does come off Main Street. There is some possibility for people using that street. So we were just following the policy, and we believe there wasn't a reason to exempt it. So I wouldn't support getting rid of those because there was no design reason to take those out. So.
President Majewski?
Yeah, it's a shame that the people that are not pleased with Patterson Street should have come to the meeting where we discussed this in quite length and try to use as much common sense and logic as possible when deciding all of these projects that we looked at. There was no discernible reason not to include Patterson and with sidewalks on both sides. There were no topography issues. There were no impediments in the way, and it was in following with our policy as it stands now. And I hope that everybody will vote to include the sidewalks.
Any more discussion on the amendment? Alderperson Dransick?
Again, foot traffic, cost, and impermeable surface. We have to start to take a look at cost and impermeable surface. We've all seen what happens with flooding in this county because of impermeable surface. I believe in having a good walkable community, but I think we also need to look at common sense. We have to look at foot traffic. This is not a heavily trafficked area. We have to look at costs. We have to look at impermeable surface.
Okay. Alderperson Riley?
Thank you, Mayor. I am curious as to what type of notice for that particular meeting that this was discussed at. What type of notice do the people who are going to be directly affected receive on that? Did they receive a mailing or something like that that advised them that this would be considered on that particular evening? I just don't know, I'm not.
Yeah, and Brett will answer your question, and just so you know, we actually are doing the engineering earlier this year than we've done in past years. So we can not only notify people earlier, but we can also get more bids, hopefully, and more favorable bids, and Brett can answer the
You're
rest of
asking
it.
about the notification for the Public Works meeting, that
For
was
the
a special meeting?
Thank you, yeah, for the
Yeah.
Patterson Street project?
It's just, it was a special meeting that was, put out on essentially the city's website.
Right, so there would not have been any notice directly to any property owners who are going to be
No,
affected?
no direct mailing.
No.
for
Okay, thank you.
things like that.
We're not,
I'm
we
not.
haven't sent out the special assessment notice yet, and
Right.
that's something that would come at some point. There would be a meeting at that point, and I'm not sure what the date is on that.
So essentially, we went through that earlier, but as we go through the preliminary design aspect of it in January or so, we will start to January, February, we'll send out a notice to affected residents of an open house. We'll go through the project with them, and then as we essentially get the final bid documents together for the project, and we get actual quantities back for cost, then another direct mailing will go out to affected residents as far as what they can expect for cost.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of things. One, with respect to that process, at that point, of course, there's really no effective way to say, you know what, we think, of course, we don't have a policy in place to maybe make an objection at this point, but there's no effective way at that stage for them to say, geez, we really don't think this is necessary, and we would prefer the city not do it, I gather, correct?
There is an open hearing that they
Right.
can go before council, and you can amend the policy at that time.
Okay. And if we may follow up?
Sure,
Thank
yeah.
you. And with respect to that, at that point, has the city incurred specific expenses that it cannot recoup with respect to engineering, et cetera?
Oh, all the way along, we're incurring expenses
Right.
as far as
Okay.
engineering work goes.
How would you have any idea how much of expense we've incurred on the Prospect Street proposal to this point? I know it's unfair, I'm
No,
just curious.
I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Not unless Jamin knows that answer. We haven't gotten a bill yet, have we? No.
Thank
It's
you.
mostly engineering at this point, and they're doing, big chunks, so they probably haven't tallied it up yet. Alderperson Johnson?
Thank you, Your Honor. To answer some of his questions, I've talked to Brett and the mayor on this. I had some in District 2 that I'm in. I've had a lot of unhappy people that went to the open house and were trying to get some numbers, and they were told that there wasn't any because the project wasn't final. So I'm trying to move along something, and hopefully other people will think this is good, is just to give an estimate. And Brett was telling me, how difficult it is because you don't know, nothing's finalized yet. But even what I was saying is that if it's 0 to 20 or whatever, when we got the denial for the street going on Christie, I went to a home of a woman that had 2 kids and said, your street's not going in, that was going to be $5,000. She was almost in tears to say thank you. And I really think we really have to give people more notice than giving the final assessment a month or 2 before the work is going to be done. Other communities pay for the sidewalks. I know this is not the right time, but it's wrong. So.
And I understand when it comes to notice, we'd like to give as much notice as possible.
Yeah.
The problem is the project doesn't go for bid until January, February. We want to try to get out as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And working
But
towards
I understand that, but there can't be that much difference. I mean, even if it's a couple $100, somebody getting a $5,000 bill is shocking.
Yeah, and I can.
And it's,
understand
to
that.
me, we're not being upfront to our citizens that we're going to say, we're putting in a sidewalk, hope you like it, even though you don't, but it's going to be $5,000.
We can't tell them a price until we know what that
I don't
price
want a
is.
price, I want an estimation. I want an estimation between, it's going to be $3,000 to $5,000. And then have a disclaimer. But when you're asking people that for $5,000, you at least to take them out to dinner before you do what you do to them,
Yeah, and again, we go back to policy, and we can also review how we put out notifications like that and try to do it as early on as possible. And we can talk about the pros and cons of putting those numbers out ahead of time, because I also don't want to give them false hope that it could be less when it comes in more, or we tell them it's more than it's actually less. It could be
Okay,
substantial.
I'm gonna start sending people your way when they get mad, right, or Rodney,
That's
because
fine.
it's just, you know, it's just, I don't think you guys get, when you get a bill for $5,000 and you only got 2 months' notice? I mean, that's crazy.
I get it. I got mine less than 5 years ago, so I totally understand it. But I also understand that, you know, I want to have quality of life, and that includes walkable, bikeable.
No, I'm
and
not
it's-
talking, I'm not talking about the sidewalks even. I'm talking about give people, when you're giving them a bill for $5,000, let the people know a little bit more in 2 months.
And I want you to also understand, it's not myself or Rodney. We're following policy. We
Right.
don't have those numbers to give them at that time. I
But
know
we
talked
can't
about
we go,
different-
like in 2018, if you had 20 feet of sidewalk, can't we say it went from this much to this much?
And what we did is in the budget going forward, we put actually engineering dollars in for the year ahead so that
Yeah.
we can get ahead of this and try
Yeah.
to get those numbers to them as soon as possible.
So we are working on that, and if, the biggest heartache for the council, and I've been there, we've been here together, is, you know, if we're gonna work on the policy, then let's do it. And if we say every year, well, we need to work on the policy, and then it goes to committee and nothing gets done, we're just, you know, kicking the can down the road, or
I know, but I
we're just
tried
fooling ourselves
I
to
tried
think
working
that.
on it and then it went to the committee again and they voted it back to what it was before I even
Well,
tried working on it.
You know, the committee recommendation was to leave it as is, and, you know, unless more council members, you know, convince the committee members and give them specific ideas on what they want changed, it's never gonna happen.
All right. And
That's the bottom
I'm
line.
not saying it's his fault or Rodney's fault,
Oh,
but I just want, they're doing a great job, but I'm just saying, we gotta let people know.
Right.
All right, thank you.
All right,
I'm
so
good.
let's, we have a couple more comments, and then we'll try to get back to business here. Go ahead, Alderperson Borsman.
Okay, so I mentioned before, I think we need to do some changes in policy sooner rather than later. And I can think of some residents fairly close to my neighborhood that if there was a sidewalk required on that side of the street, that not only the implication for the cost of the sidewalk, but for an incredible retaining wall that would be required, would just be astronomical figure on that. And so I think it's imperative that we change some, so that we have more flexibility on this rather than having a universal policy of we got to have them on both sides. If, you know, we're gonna be talking to people who are spending upwards, I think, of, you know, just estimated for me, $20,000 on a retaining wall. This is like, not only is sidewalks an issue, but also the implication for a retaining wall. So I really do think it's imperative this year that we look at this issue.
Okay. Alderperson Hirsch.
To get back to the matter at hand, could Brett or Matt explain why Lowell Street is not going to get a sidewalk? What are the easements that you're talking about, and or maybe
There's, if you look closely at that, the schematic
uh-huh.
on the south side, can you see where the right-of-way is? It's right up against it's like a foot off of the roadway. So we have to be acquiring land
Okay.
to put in a sidewalk, and then there would, you know, terrace.
Okay. All right.
It's not economically feasible.
Right. And, you know, to staff's credit, they brought that to the attention of the committee, and the committee agreed, and that's why the recommendation is there. And, you know, the staff is directed to follow the policy that the council sets. That's what they're trying to do. And in an exception like this, if they think it's really not cost-effective or practical, they're going to bring it to the attention. And where it gets difficult, if you say, well, we don't want to do this sidewalk here or this retaining wall here, then the guy across the street says, well, wait a minute, I had to do mine last year. So then it becomes a fairness issue as well. And it's really difficult for staff and to have that conversation as well. So, you know, it's difficult, and it's not unique to Stoughton. A lot of communities have the same conversation every year, and, you know, at the end of the day, it seems like the default has been to go with the existing policy. So if the group truly wants to make that change, I would encourage you to start jotting down your ideas and send them to the committee chair, and they can get it on the agenda and see what happens again. So we have a motion on the table with an amendment. Is that right?
You have to
Yes.
vote on the amendment. We never did that.
Right. So the amendment was the
To remove the south side of Patterson
the
Street.
south side of Patterson Street.
No. Oh,
Yeah, because we had already approved
did the
the
grant one.
other one.
okay.
Okay, any other questions on the amendment to remove the south side of the Patterson Street? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, we should probably do a roll call on that one.
Hirsch,
No.
Riley,
Aye.
Boersma,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Reeves,
No.
Mieski,
No.
Caravello,
No.
Jensen,
No.
O'Connor,
No.
Durancic,
Aye.
Bartlett.
No.
That motion failed on a vote of 4-7.
So it takes us back to our original motion with the one amendment from, what was that?
We
F
already,
Street or?
we already
Street.
voted on that.
Right, so we go back to the original motion with that amendment included. Any more discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
I heard
Sorry.
3 noes.
3 noes, yeah.
Is that right?
Roll.
Roll call? Okay,
I'm a no, I'm sorry.
all right.
Riley,
No.
Boersma,
No.
Johnson,
No.
Reeves,
Aye.
Mieski,
Aye.
Caravello,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
O'Connor,
Aye.
Durancic,
No.
Bartlett,
Aye.
Hirsch.
Aye.
That motion carries on a vote of 7-4.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us to item number 9, which is Resolution 200 of 2018, and this comes from Public Safety.
Thank you, Your Honor. Resolution R 200, 2018, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to appoint Timothy Whelan as the agent for Ultramart LLC, Pick and Save number 390, located at 1750 US Highway 51, and I would so move.
Second.
Second by Reeves. Any discussion on this one, Greg?
It's straightforward. They're just changing their agent, so.
Okay, any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you. Resolution R 2001 of 2018 comes from my office, and I'm looking for somebody to make a motion to confirm my citizen appointment of Linda Lane to the food pantry.
I'll move to confirm.
Second.
I heard all sorts of, I heard a motion by Boersma. Who had the second?
Unanimous seconds.
Second by Bartlett. Any discussion on that one? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. That carries. Resolution 123 of 2018 comes from CACP. Alderperson Reeves.
Thank you, Your Honor. Resolution 123-2018, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to adopt a policy relating to attending city meetings via remote access. And I move to approve.
Second.
And there's a motion and a second. Alderperson Reeves.
So I think we have more work to do on this, actually, but, and we may want to think about tabling, but we would like some discussion. Some of you are aware that there was some concerns about whether or not the Planning Commission, well, specifically Redevelopment Authority, should apply, and I also understand there may be some legal ramifications that perhaps the council can't direct the Redevelopment Authority how to run their meetings. Do we know about that, or is that something?
I don't know if we have an opinion yet. So this was an item that had come to the council with a recommendation to not allow any call-in communication or call-in voting or a person calling into a meeting as part of a quorum. And the council at that point said, no, we think that we should consider allowing that in certain circumstances. So we sent it back to CACP, And the recommendation that came here tonight, basically, the intent of it was to allow, if you had a standing committee where we have 4 council members on there, in order to have a quorum and to conduct a meeting, we need to have 3 out of 4 council people available. Well, we've run into situations often where maybe only 2 of the council members can make the meeting, but maybe the 3rd one would be available by phone to call in. And the intent of this policy was to allow that. And when it went back to the CACP, we also added language in there, and maybe we shouldn't have, that said we don't think it's a good idea to have that practice at the council, the planning commission, or at the RDA, because those are larger groups. The decisions that they make are typically final, where the committees are more recommendation based. So we felt that we recommended out of that committee that those groups be exempted from allowing somebody to call in, be part of a quorum, and to vote. We don't have a problem with somebody calling into a RDA or the planning commission even, but we don't know if they should be counted toward the quorum, or are there to, their votes be counted via the phone. And I know the city attorney brought this to our attention as well, and I don't know if you haven't had time to really make an opinion on those items yet. And that's where we're looking for direction, to see if the council does or does not want to include the 3, if we're heading in the right direction on the standing committee, and if you want the city attorney to get the opinion. So I have Alderperson Boersma and then Durancic.
I think with Alderperson Reese talked about, especially with the legality of this, and the prudence of it as well, that I would like to see this go back to CACP to relook at it, and then thus tabling this. So I would move to table this.
Second?
No discussion.
I think they wanted some
Can't
feedback first.
discuss it then.
All right, so we can't discuss the table, so I guess I'll talk to you guys about it afterward. So all in favor of tabling, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
We'll take a roll call on the table.
Bartlett,
No.
Hirsch,
No.
Durancic,
No.
Boersma,
Aye.
Johnson,
What if I vote yes or no?
on tabling.
On tabling, which we're either going to table it or we're going to have more discussion.
Yes, table.
Reeves,
No.
Mayeski,
No.
Caravello,
No.
Jensen,
No.
O'Connor,
No.
Okay.
and
moi.
Riley, sorry.
Thanks, no.
Okay.
Last but not least. Okay.
That motion fails on a vote of 2 to 9.
Okay. The reason I didn't want you to table is we're looking for direction, so I think Alderperson Durancic's going to give us some direction.
Well, I think that terms need to be clarified here.
Okay.
Attendance or participation, because in the second paragraph, you say participation via remote access is basically prohibited. Well, participation to me means something different than actually being part of a quorum and also voting. So I think that the terms actually really need to be clarified, because I have a different opinion if it's just somebody's calling in and they're participating versus if they're actually voting during the proceedings. And so I really need more clarification on something like that.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Alderperson Hirsch, and then we'll go down the lane.
I guess I just want to follow up with, the discussion with what Denise just said. So if I'm hearing right, you want participation, you can participate by phone, but you're not counted as a quorum and you can't vote. I mean, I guess we need direction of what you mean by that. If we say you can participate by phone and any of these committees, but that's not counted as a quorum, or you can't vote, or what is it how you want us to change that? I mean, this is where we go back to CACP and we're like, what do they want us to do? So do you want to be able to vote via phone, or do you not want to be able to vote via phone?
You have some?
If I could on that point, so as I understand it, with the policy draft in front of us tonight, first it's broken into two different pieces, standing committees on the one hand, and then council, plan commission, and the RDA on the other. With respect to, and I think it is critical to define, the key issues seem to me, one, does the person's attendance by phone or remotely, can that person be counted for quorum purposes? It doesn't say right now one way or the other under the first paragraph relating to committees. So that should be clarified. And in my view is, what I'm hearing is the reason this is being done is so that in fact that person could be counted for quorum purposes. So that's the whole point, so we should say that. Second, to me, it would be helpful to define what we mean by participation, participate. To me, participation means full participation, but maybe not to someone else. So that should also be defined, or we have some ambiguity. And with respect to, again, the first paragraph, if the idea is that someone can appear by phone and count for quorum purposes, in my mind, they should be able to participate fully. They should be able to speak and vote. I mean, to me, that's what participation is. You can speak to an issue, you can make motions, you can vote. Full participation. And so that's what I would say about standing committees. With respect to the second paragraph, the policy issue here is, I mean, what this says is that it says participation, and I think to me that means any kind of participation at the Plan Commission, the RDA, or the City Council shall be prohibited. So someone could perhaps remotely listen in, but they couldn't speak, they couldn't make motions, they couldn't vote, they wouldn't count for quorum purposes. If that's the intent, fine, but I think we need to make sure this is what you're really intending. And then lastly, on the legal issue, I haven't rendered an opinion on this, but I do question whether the council has the authority to make that kind of a procedural ruling that would be binding on the redevelopment authority, which is an independent body. And so I question that.
Does the planning commission fall in that same category?
I see the plan commission as different. I see the planning commission as not an independent body, independent from the city in the same way that the redevelopment authority is. The redevelopment authority is really kind of like a separate quasi-governmental entity. The plan commission is kind of more of a subset of city government. It's an advisory body to the council on many issues. I see them differently, but again, I haven't rendered an opinion on that.
Okay. I had Alderperson Bartlett and then Riley.
Yeah, I'm not completely clear on the participation versus attendance. At a minimum, I'd like to see attendance allowed. I know RDA and Planning Commission, we do have some experts that make a living by traveling the country, doing different work. And at a minimum, it'd be nice to have them to be able to call in and give input on certain subjects. Give an example, Todd Barman on the Planning Commission is, I think you'd be fine calling him an expert in preservation and historical preservation, and it would be very good to have him to be able to call in on certain matters if he's somewhere else, or if one of these experts is delayed by natural event and he can't fly back or something, it'd be good to have some kind of attendance. I can kind of see Planning Commission why you might not want them to be able to count for the quorum or make a decision, because it's nice to have them to be able to face the people before us with business before the commission and public input for those public speaking sessions. So I could kind of go either way on that part, but at a minimum, I'd like to have, I guess, attendance, I think is what it's called, allowed. Since we have such great experts here in the community that do volunteer for some of these committees, and they do make a living traveling, I think we need to have some kind of exception. It needs to be controlled, so we're not having half of the committee or something calling in or doing it all by phone, but control the numbers and just have some policy on that I would support.
Alderperson Riley.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, the whole intent of this, of course, was with respect to the standing committees to ensure that we would have quorums if we were in danger of not having a quorum, to allow at least, and only one member pursuant to this, to appear via remote access. I think it's important that we have that. I appreciate Alderperson Duranchik's point and the city attorney's point that we need to clarify, that they are actually a participating member for quorum purposes, and that they are deemed to be attending via the remote access. I think that's important. I find Alderperson Bartlett's comments enlightening and interesting too with respect to the second half of this. We don't know right now, but it appears that we cannot really dictate to the redevelopment authority what they do or don't do. So I think it's easy enough to remove them from this. With respect to persons who wish to provide, and we're not talking at that point, I think, Alderperson Bartlett, about actual members of the planning commissions. We're talking about people you are relying upon for information, et cetera, could participate via remote access, correct?
This is a member of the commission himself who has
okay.
this expert knowledge. So.
Oh, okay, all right. But are they required for a quorum?
I'm okay if they're not required for quorum, but I'd like to have some issues before the commission to have their input if they're not able to get back in time for the meeting.
Thank you.
Did you have something over here?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that, the RDA does have their own set of bylaws. And so I think that, again, it kind of reinforces what our attorney has said. And, and the way this reads to me is that, we have somebody who's out of town tomorrow night and we need his expertise. Because we're going to be dealing with several different issues that he's involved with.
Right.
And so
I think the spirit of the policy was to allow them to call in, but not to be counted as part of the quorum and the vote. But like you said, the RDA is probably something we shouldn't even be considering as part of this policy, and we're okay with that. We were just trying to bring something to the council to keep this thing rolling. I think it was, I forget when this was first brought here, when it was March. So we're trying to, get some resolution to this. So the feedback we're getting tonight, sounds like what we should do is just forget about the RDA, focus on the standing committees, and then figure out what to do about the planning commission. Alderperson Boersma?
Yeah, I just wondered if there's any of the other ones that are similar to the RDA, like what about police and fire commission, for instance, or ones that are somewhat separated from the city.
They have their own authorities as well.
But it wasn't mentioned. I mean, I'm not sure that one was mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would put the Police and Fire Commission in a category. I'm not sure where I would put that one. More like the Plan. I would, in my mind, it's more like the Plan Commission in terms of being kind of operating as a subunit of city government as opposed to an independent entity. But again, this is something I haven't really looked at in terms of are they able to make their own rules and their own determination on something like that, and I just don't know the answer. This policy doesn't address that body, at least as currently drafted.
Okay. Alderperson Johnson?
That's why I was trying to table it, not because I wanted discussion, but I think Matt's got to do his work.
Right.
So instead of going back to another committee meeting for you guys to discuss things that you don't know the answer to, I was trying to table it so Matt could do work.
And that's fine. We just wanted to make sure that not only did he do his work, that council members had an opportunity to express some of the other side issues so that the committee could bring back.
But even though you can discuss it all you want, but if Matt says no go, we says no go.
Well, I think, yeah, he'll be part of the discussion at the committee as well. Alderperson Jensen.
I just wanted to bring out one point. When we have a vacancy and we have to fill that vacancy, there are some questions that we ask. One of the questions that we ask is about your availability. So when we ask that question, we want to know if they're going to be there. We tell them you're going to have standing committees that you're going to be responsible to be there. You're also responsible to be at these meetings right here. I have a real discomfort with this policy on the whole. I'm not comfortable with having people calling in. The face-to-face thing is important to me. I believe that the people should make every effort to be there. If they can't be there, okay, fine, I guess you're gonna have to have some kind of policy if you wanna go ahead with this, but, I don't believe that they should have voting. They can put their input in, that's fine, but, their vote should not count, and they should not count as a quorum.
Alderperson Hirsch?
Thank you. I think, to respond to Elder Jensen, I think, in an ideal world, that would be good. But right now, we're trying, since I've been on council, the council has gotten younger and they are a working council. And so if we want to make sure that our council is representative of our community, I think this is what this policy is trying to do, is to try to accommodate people that are working, that want to be on council, but sometimes either family or their job takes them away. They still want to participate, but sometimes they're out of town. So we have to kind of go with the changes of what's going on in the world, in our community. So I think we're trying to do the best. We made sure there was only one person that could call in, not to have the whole subcommittee or the whole council calling in. That it was for these special occasions when we know that we weren't going to have a quorum and we have some business that needs to get done. We wanted something in place. So I understand. I don't want us to have only the mayor and Holly be here and everybody else calling in. I think that would be...
I'd call in too.
Or poor Holly would be here by herself. That's right. I don't want us to get that so far sci-fi, but I also want us to be able to accommodate the working council.
President Majewski?
When we first discussed this, none of us envisioned that anybody would abuse this, that this was for extenuating circumstances. And they have come up occasionally where it was vital that there be a quorum, and they were really hard pressed for that to happen. So your problem with people is not being able, or for a better lack of way of putting it, shirking the responsibility of being there in person. I don't think anybody who sits at this table would do that on just because they thought they could. So I think we have to take it in that light, and I also think that the chairs of the committees will be given should be given advance notice when for this to happen. They have to be in order for them to call in, and at that point in time, they're going to be giving a good excuse for why they're not there. So, like I said, I don't think this is something that will be taken lightly. It will probably only be used in extenuating circumstances, and it's just good to have it on paper so that we're not caught in a bind.
Alderperson Jensen?
I thank you for the comments, and that was not my concern. I was not concerned that it was going to be abused or whatever. And I'm sure that the ordinance or the policy would not allow for that. It was just that I was just trying to express my discomfort with it. When I'm chairing a committee, I want to see the faces of the people I'm working with, and I want to see the faces of the people who've attended that, the citizens that have come to those committee meetings. It makes it more personal. It makes it more real. If we need to do this, that's fine. And then just a comment to Regina too. I said I'm one of the older ones on this committee, I think, and I'm still working. So I mean, I understand that, and I honestly believe that I have maybe missed one or two meetings in the 12 years I've been on council. So I mean, I make every effort, and I just think that it's our responsibility to do so.
I agree.
Okay. All right, I think we have direction. What do you think,
So
Lisa?
move to table?
Okay.
Second.
Here's a motion. Your hand up.
Jesus, Mary Joseph.
There's a motion and a second. No discussion on table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. All right, thank you. It'll come back sometime, probably next year.
Let's hope not.
All right, Resolution 202
yes.
of 2018 comes from the Finance Committee, Alderperson Jurancic.
Yes, the Finance Committee met on November 27th and recommends Resolution 202, 2018, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to amend the 2018 City of Stoughton operating budget, and I so move.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion, Alderperson Jurancic.
And I will hand this over to our finance director, because I think this is in preparation for our 2018 audit, right?
Yeah, for the most part. So for the interest of time, I'll go through this pretty quickly, but I'll answer any questions you folks have. Ultimately, we have better information now that we're rolling into December. The biggest impact we see here relates to the taxi grant. The budget is actually done before the taxi grant is complete. So you can see that's the biggest adjustment we're making. It's actually in the good way. So it's a positive fiscal impact of $34,000 in total, and the rest of them really have to relate to just presentation and ease of accounting at this point.
Any questions or comments? That's it? That was brief.
Yeah.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Our 203 of 2018 also comes from Finance.
Yes, Finance met on November 27th and recommends R 203, 2018, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to engage Actuarial and Healthcare Solutions, LLC, to perform the City of Stoughton liability for other post-employment benefits. I so move.
Second.
And I will hand this over to the Finance Director again.
We'll see how brief this one is.
Right, this one. So $3,800, this is required. This is through the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. I'll say we, but not really we because I wasn't here, but we were aware of this following last year's audit. As I shifted gears from budget into actual audit prep, I realized we had to implement this year, so I reached out to the auditors. They said, yes, you do in fact have to engage an actuarial company to come in and do this study for us. This will be a reoccurring cost, but it will be every other year for us, so we can anticipate every other year to see about a $4,000 cost coming in to pay for this study. The overall fiscal impact of the study itself, we can't determine at this point. It's hard to explain, but it's almost kind of a made-up liability at this point. But it's also offset by an asset on the balance sheet, so it's more of a balance sheet entry with some amortizing costs as the years go on. So I can't really tell you what the fiscal impact will be for the budget as a result of this study, but it is a non-cash impact. But again, we do actually have to follow this based on the accounting standards. So we reached out to 4 different companies. This was the lowest bid, and they're qualified to do it.
Any questions or comments? Hear none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed? All right. Last item, our 204, 2018. We're looking for a motion to appoint our finance director
So moved.
to the RDA as the executive director. That was quick. And this has been something that's been traditional with the RDA as the finance director or economic development person has served on that committee or that commission is a member or representative of the city. We have a question?
Well, it's not a question, is that the RDA did spend a lot of times writing some bylaws, and in their bylaws, they said that the finance director could be the executive director. So instead of saying wishy-washy because it's been done in the past, I would rather say as per the RDA bylaws.
Okay.
Unless...
So this gets a little interesting. The RDA, the bylaws at one point were revised, I think in the spring, to say that the finance director will be the executive director. That's what the RDA, and I said, hey, RDA, you don't have the authority to do that.
Right.
To compel that person to be that. You can ask that person to be your executive director, and they can say yes or no. But if you want to make the RDA, if you want to require that, the city council is going to have to authorize that. So what I see this as is essentially the city council saying, essentially amending the job description in a sense for your finance director to say, one of your duties is, if asked by the RDA to serve as their executive director, you will do that. And then I think it's up to the RDA to decide, do they want that person to be their executive director?
Yeah, then we ran it through HR and we talked to Jamin about it, and that's how it got here. So it sounds like a pretty simple thing to execute.
No, it is.
But
I
it's-
just didn't like the language of, because it was done before, that's why we're doing it now, as opposed to, was actually part of the RDA bylaws, but if it's convoluted like that, then we gotta go back to the
Always is.
wishy-washy.
Yeah, so in this, we're doing this quickly in part so that Jamin can participate in a closed session meeting tomorrow night. In an ideal world, what I would like to see is the finance director's job description amended to say that the finance director will, if appointed by the RDA as their executive director, will serve as their executive director. So ideally, that's what I'd like to get to, but we're in a hurry to get this done.
Yep, that's fine.
Matt made my point, and that is that it should go back to personnel for a change in.
Tweak the job description.
It needs to be tweaked by personnel.
It does. You have that on your list, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, that list is getting longer,
It's
isn't it?
long, I'm out of paper, we gotta be done.
Any questions or comments on this? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Jamin. Put that on your resume.
Yet another
to
thing
adjourn.
you have to do.
Who said that first? Did you say something?
I probably did, but you know, it
All
wasn't
right.
pertinent to anything at all.
All right. All in favor of adjourn?
Aye.
Aye.
Favor aye.
Any opposed? None
I read
opposed.
Jamin's job
Thank you.
Hey, Phil,
And I thought-
that's always better to see it.